Hello, can everybody hear me? Yes, I'm hearing myself back. Good. So my name is John Burgess. I'm playing the role of Jody Shaw today. Jody was kind enough to swap presentations with me because I had unexpected travel plans crop up. I am an assistant professor at the University of Alabama's School of Library and Information Studies. And really, I'm coming to you today much more as an instructor than as a researcher, because I'm speaking to you today basically with a report from the field. I'm going to make, as you see, a case for resilience and adaptability as LIS core values, not the case. So why is it a case and not the case? It's a case because it's I don't know if you've had a dog or a cat who will not swallow a pill. I have cats that are like profound warriors when it comes to any time I come close to them with a pill. And so you can sometimes trick them into eating things. Yes, you've got the gesture. Yes, put it in a pill pocket, put it in cream cheese, whatever. So what I'm talking about today is how I slip, unbeknownst to my students, resilience and adaptability in such a way that that doesn't elicit violent claw-based reactions. And so the University of Alabama, I'm incredibly fortunate to work there because, what's the first thing you think of when you hear the word Alabama? That's what we think of too. And so what we've chosen to do as a faculty is embrace that legacy and make as a central component, it's right there in both our mission and vision statements, make a central component of the objective of our MLIS program be social justice and social responsibility education. And as a result of putting that front and center, we are incredibly fortunate in our admissions to have students who seek that out as a major component of what they want to do with their lives as librarians and as archivists. And so we're incredibly fortunate. That said, you can come into a program with a desire to be an activist librarian, and still, when somebody hits you with runaway climate change, which I've done, hit them with the geopolitical, in the next 50 years equivalent of Thomas Hobbes' War of All Against All, read in tooth and claw, for your Spencer fans out there, and they just like recoil in horror. It's like, I came here because I love civilization, technological civilization. I came here because I want to bring order to the galaxy. I want to be a Jedi. I didn't come here because to fight a retreating battle into the last desperate days of humanity, even though that's probably what they're going to be doing. But they don't want to hear it, and I don't blame them because I don't want to hear it. So what can I do to engage these incredibly enthusiastic activist librarians and archivists to be with these concepts in a way that they're receptive to? So that's, I use time like crazy. I am sorry, y'all. Here's what I'm going to very quickly do with the rest of my 4 minutes of time, I assume. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my personal stake in all this, what I feel to be, what are not the moral imperatives, not all the moral imperatives, but the moral imperatives that I've identified in things that I'm already teaching to my students. My background is in information ethics. What can I slip in, through other routes? And then I ask this question: are the core values of librarianship, those very aspirational list of things that we as librarians all believe, supposedly, are those sufficient to address the imperatives that I identify? Then I'm going to, as I stated in the title, make a supposition that maybe it's a good idea to add resilience and adaptability as LIS values, and indeed that's what I work into every module that I can. But then I ask the follow-up question, does this combination actually successfully identify those values, and are resilience and adaptability actually LIS virtues, or am I just bringing my own personal interest and agendas into the classroom? Yes, I am, certainly, but maybe not just that. So very quickly, I have a stake in this as an LIS educator because my students are wonderful, but they're still professional students, and they still want to just give me that job, and I can't blame them, because that's you've already had the wonder years, the transformative experience of going to college. You just want to go in for your second career sometimes. You want to get your MLAS, you want to get an excellent position, but that does create this mindset of, give me the skills that I need to immediately fit into the job market, to immediately get the cutting edge job, and they're not wrong. This is what they're paying for. But how can I, as an LIS educator, help them think beyond short-term gains, beyond pragmatic solutions, and to start thinking about strategy, to start thinking long-term, to start thinking about the strategic investments in their own lives, and how they can strategically invest from their lives into the broader society. I also care about this as an ethicist, because I think these are interesting issues that can actually make a difference in the world. Ethics, the secret about teaching ethics is never mention the word ethics. Yeah, there's a way. Never mention the word ethics, because people will recoil in horror, because they think that you're judging them. Not all ethics are that way. Ethics are how you can figure out how to live the best life possible through whatever standard it is that you set. I'm a virtue ethicist. I believe in flourishing. I think we all find ways to grow over the course of their lives towards the things that we find most meaningful. So as an ethicist, I don't think we can do that as individuals or as a society without promoting adaptability and resilience. And then as a human being, I see this. I see everything that's happening. It makes me cry. It's awful. Some days you lose hope, and it's really awful. But then you recover, and you go back to work, and you do everything that you can to give good people the passion they need to keep working at this in hopes that there can be a change. So what moral imperatives that exist in other parts of my work did I find that I can slip into this dialogue about sustainability? So awareness and memory is an obvious one. Floridi is one of the main contributors to the field of philosophy of information. He's super technical. You don't have to read him, but just believe me when I say that he has a really beautiful argument about how the moral imperative of all information organization is to fight entropy with every ounce of being that you have. And so entropy comes in a lot of forms. Entropy comes in forgetting. Entropy comes in destroying things intentionally or unintentionally. Entropy comes in with letting the systems that exist that can access the information and the knowledge that you have, letting those degrade. And so the ultimate expression of entropy is letting all of our languages go away, letting all of our cultural memory going away, letting our organic, our eyes, our ears, our physical apparatus that cared about information go away. That's the ultimate retreat into entropy. While there's a human mind alive, while we have breath, while we can work together, there will be opportunities to hold back the tide of entropy. And this is one of the things that I, in the very first lecture that I give my students, that I teach them, is one of their missions on Earth. And they dig it. They really like it. The next is rational agency and continuance. This is not as sexy or interesting, because Immanuel Kant is rarely, anyway, sorry for you Kant lovers out there, but there's the notion then that that agents must be used. Agents may never be used as ends, as mean. Oh, why am I? Because I'm nervous, and there are about 30 sets of eyes on me. But use as ends never means. So you can't bend humans to your will. They can only be the object of your efforts. In this case, when you think about the anthropic age, okay, when you think about an age that is defined by its relationship with human agency, that gives you a tremendous responsibility. If you treat this environment which we are co-extant with, we emerge from the same ecological source, we are absorbed, we are devoured by the same ecological source. There's no distinction from us. If we treat other human beings with this ultimate sense of agency and respect, and there's no distinction between what we emerged from and what we will eventually go into, then how can we treat it with anything less than this same notion? I'm going to have to summarize these. There's the notion of justice as fairness, that is a lot of the background for most of the core behind our teachings of social justice and social responsibility. They basically rest on the shoulders of John Rawls. And then this last idea, authentic otherness, is really an expression of our efforts for diversity, and in this sense it's not merely cultural diversity, it's not merely racial diversity, even though these are extraordinarily important topics, but it's also a diversity of ways of thinking. It pulls into the field of cognitive justice. I'm not sure if many of you have heard of it, but it's a brilliant field where basically it is, from it I've taken the message that I give to my students, that the ultimate goal of librarianship is to oppose epistemicide, epistemology, the theory of knowledge, justified true belief, what we have to say yes to, basically, combined with the word side, like regicide, fratricide, so basically the death of. So it is our job as a profession to oppose the destruction of ways of seeing the world. And this can be through the extinction of languages, yes, but it can also be through extinguishing ways of life. And even in our own institutions, it can be making sure that you only do research that can be funded by grants, as opposed to the arts, as opposed to humanistic research. There are a lot of ways to destroy a way of knowing in the world, and one of the librarian's main responsibilities is to actively oppose that. How am I doing on time? That's okay. 7 minutes. All right. I'm going to put less wiggle in it. You'll recognize that there's a little bit overlap between the standard 3 pillars of sustainability, but there are significant differences. So even though these are incredibly useful guidelines, these are what I'm actually teaching. These are what I'm using to inspire, hopefully, students in class. And so while these are useful, they're not the ones that I'm explicitly measuring up against the core values. So are the core values sufficient to handle these 4 moral obligations that I lay out? Spoiler alert, no. But double spoiler alert, almost. As long as you accept that things like diversity can include biodiversity and cognitive diversity, as long as you think of service as extending to notions of stewardship, serving not just human agents but non-human agents, social responsibility extending not just to the current generation but to future generations with intergenerational justice. If you do like I do and cast these very broadly, but still put that ALA label on the top, they're like, oh, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. It's like, yes, that's what you're supposed to be doing. But it's not enough, and I'll tell you why. even stretched beyond all recognition, there are things that they're lacking. And what's lacking is this rational agency. If you kind of loosely stack up what they're meant to accomplish, they're really, maybe education and lifelong learning. I don't know. There's very much not this sense that that there is a responsibility, an individual personal responsibility, to not exploit systems. There's really public good kind of comes close because there's that whole shared ownership, but it's not quite there. So I make the argument in my classes that resilience and adaptability will fit those gaps. 5 minutes. So basically, what you have then, do I map it over? Yeah, so we'll just skip straight to this one. Both resilience and adaptability fit into this rational agency field. So show of hands, everybody knows what resilience is? Anybody who doesn't? Okay, everybody knows what adaptability is? That's great, I don't have to define them. So what, this is so beautiful that I don't have to define them. I'm so lucky to be in a group of people where I don't have to define them. So basically, adaptability, what does it look like in LIS? It goes back to this notion of multiple ways of thinking, but it also literally means adaptability. What can you do to help your communities not have a single source of income, not have basically a single, you can't control the religious content, but what can you do to support the needs of seekers or questers or people who want to see the world differently? This falls a little bit under intellectual freedom, but it also encourages this curiosity, fundamental curiosity about different ways to interact with the world, with the belief that the more ways we have of knowing things, the more ways we're going to be able to solve problems. If we all become scientific naturalistic reductionists, we'll only have one way of solving problems, and that one way is not enough. So if we can encourage our research partners, our institutions, through collective action, in our collection development policies, in our de-accession policies, in the negotiations that we do, et cetera, that it is important to foster as many different ways of knowing as possible. We're fostering adaptability. Resilience, personal resilience. We want to have programming that talks about the importance of being psychologically resilient as an individual, but we also want to have programming that helps support the infrastructure of our cities and towns as we're going to be encountering more and more economic shocks and political shocks. So resilience here is personal resilience, but it's also resilience for community, it's resilience for country and for the technological civilization that we currently rely on for flourishing, for good or for ill. So both of these fall under rational agency because the good that we're trying to accomplish is not a good that we are exploiting, but one that we're seeing ourselves as part of. But are these LIS values? Kind of. If you believe that libraries are symbiotic organisms that require a civilization in order to thrive, then yes, because I can't imagine a library without people, and I can't imagine an effective library without people who are curious. But I also believe that it's an LIS value because it's prudent to be a librarian, and you want to have resilient people in your community. You want to have adaptable ways of solving problems because, again, see the symbiotic nature. And then we can really skip most of these final thoughts. There's something that I do want to make sure that I point out is one of the questions is, are they sufficient? The answer is they're sufficient if you don't take a deep ecological view of what the whole project of sustainability is. If you're view of it as sustainable development, where you want to sort of continue to mitigate risks and propagate a technological civilization, which I do, then it's okay. But if you really want to radically rethink the project of human life, then it's not. But I would argue, when you tell me how to convince LAS students that that's what they're there and getting their MLIS to do, I would love to hear it, because I would love to share that message with them too. But anyway, that's all I have. Thank you all for your time.
So my name's Billy Templeton, and I teach in a public school, and I'm also trying to trick my students on a daily basis, and I think in large part that's what my talk is about as well. I came to public school 3 years ago. Before this, I studied at Syracuse. I received an MFA in poetry, and then I worked in the field of sustainable agriculture for a while, and it's just recently that I've gotten involved in education. I married a librarian. That's how I learned about this really, thank you, appreciate that. And that's how I learned about this really interesting event. So earlier this week, a few students came to me upset. Their gym teacher had just openly mocked them because he assumed that they believed in climate change. It was an unusually cold morning in May, and the gym teacher decided to take his 30 students outside to play soccer. As they were walking to the field, he loudly asked the class, how could climate change be real when we still have such cool mornings? He told them, you would have to be stupid to believe that stuff. It was then that he openly called out students who he assumed believed in that, quote, nonsense. This is not an isolated incident at the public school where I teach. Students do study environmental science and are being taught climate science downstairs in the science department. However, after the bell rings, they trek upstairs to their advanced placement English course, where they have to defend their belief that humans play a role in climate change, because their English teacher does not believe that humans could possibly alter the climate. According to a February 2016 issue of Science, 30% of high school teachers believe the climate is likely changing because of natural events, and 12% don't acknowledge humans as a cause at all. It is true that many students will hear the ramblings of some of their teachers and be able to recognize misinformation and biasness. However, the majority of students either cannot distinguish between truth or fiction, or, especially with the elementary students, are inclined to trust whatever authority figure tells them is true. The problem of talking about climate change in a public school setting is fraught with challenges, primarily because the academic culture created by many teachers is influenced not by the pursuit of knowledge, but by a systemic political biasness that poisons any attempt to build an open-minded, curious school culture. As much as we would like to pretend that these teachers and this mindset would eventually retire in the near future, the recent election should serve as a stark reminder that the dismissive rhetoric concerning climate change is not going away. Here, we recognize that the Anthropocene, and we understand the coming decades will be fraught with peril. This acknowledgement most certainly is not the case within the public education system of the broader United States, and I believe it's safe to assume that under the current U.S. Department of Education that it will not be discussed or even acknowledged by the current administration. This level of incompetence is not only antithetical to the department's mission statement, but it also actively promotes a system that encourages the destruction of waste and resources. So, how can we possibly address this most urgent dilemma, and what, if any, role will libraries play when we decide to educate our children about the reality that they face? First, let me address a few unequivocal truths. First, the U.S. Department of Education explicitly states in its mission statement that it will promote student achievement and preparation for global competitiveness by fostering educational excellence and ensuring equal access. 2, according to NASA, over 97% of climate scientists agree that climate warming trends are due to human activities, and that because humanity is already committed to these changes in the climate, the response must be to mitigate and to adapt to this reality in order to survive. 3, a warming climate will severely impact future generations in terms of water and resource scarcity, coastal flooding, agricultural disruptions, ocean acidification, biodiversity, refugee crises, to name a few. As a public educator, I, like many of my colleagues, spend a lot of time thinking about how I can best prepare my students to succeed after they graduate from high school. But how can I seriously claim that I'm properly preparing students for their real future without acknowledging that that future they face will likely be radically different from the one we're currently living in? And if a consensus of educators does agree that we should and are required to prepare students for a life in the Anthropocene, how will we be able to create a school culture that can withstand the dismissive attitudes of educators who will actively seek to undermine any attempt to teach climate readiness skills? To answer these questions, first we must accept that we've lost another rhetorical battle and should concede the phrase climate change when in the public school arena. This is not to say we will not be teaching the skills necessary to adapt and mitigate the difficulties to come, but the phrase, along with global warming or anything resembling these phrases, must be dropped from the school teacher's lexicon. Unfortunately, the phrases conjure politically charged feelings and reactions that prevent educators from valuing and teaching students the skills they really need to survive. Second, traditional didactic instruction must be de-emphasized in favor of place-based, project-based learning that requires students to engage in solving real-world problems with ingenuity and creativity. Third, public school libraries will have to become a critical player for innovation and collaboration to take place, and public school librarians working with content specialists can be the keystones to help create a multidisciplinary curriculum that empowers students and school leaders. There is no doubt that retooling the separate business as usual way educators and school libraries operate will require perseverance and unconventional thinking, and it will be difficult. However, when faced with the catastrophic reality, I am certain that this shift in the focus of career preparation to problem-solving skills will become mainstream. I've worked in the fields of both sustainable agriculture and education over the past decade, and have witnessed and been part of early fringe movements that have since had significant impacts on global issues. I believe that if we are to have a chance of surviving beyond the next century, we must educate our youngest students to be practiced and skilled in innovative approaches to solving climate change problems. Last week, here in the state of New York, a new set of learning standards, the Next Generation New York State English and Mathematics Learning Standards, or NEGNIZLESMS, terrible acronym, was introduced was introduced to the Board of Regents with the goal to recognize the importance of preparing New York's children for success in life through a rigorous education and provide the foundation needed to get there. The irony, of course, is that nowhere in this forward-thinking set of standards do we see evidence that the state has any intention to address the most pressing imperative issue, the changing climate. That will, without doubt, shape the future for all children. It should go without saying, the state of New York has an obligation and a profound responsibility to acknowledge this future and plan to educate students so that they will be able to mitigate the impact of and adapt to the radically altered environment. When considering the scale of the problem, most that accept the evidence would assume that teaching the cause and impact of climate change would comprise a significant chunk of the curriculum. However, after conducting a survey for the journal Science, Penn State professor Eric Plutzer found that teachers, on average, spend only 1 to 2 hours over the academic year on the issue. Plutzer also found that when teachers did teach climate science, it was littered with misinformation. Or they take the teach the controversy route, which gives equal credence to unsubstantiated, anti-anthropomorphic counterclaims and is law in some states. The Heartland Institute, a conservative think tank that denies human-caused climate change, has as its goal to get a copy of its book, Why Scientists Disagree About Global Warming, into the hands of every public school science teacher. And it's succeeding in some states. The consequences and dire nature of this problem, coupled with the aggressive misinformation campaigns like the Heartland Institutes, must be stressed. Students who lack basic understanding in the fundamental nature of scientific inquiry will, without doubt, fail to recognize the grave reality that could very well be the extinction of the human species. If the New York State Education Department, Governor Cuomo, and Education Commissioner Mary Ellen Ellie are serious about preparing students for a successful future, they will mandate that schools teach skills that will allow them to be resilient, innovative, and inquisitive about the world they inherit. The future will be grim, and to be honest, I have little hope for most of humanity's long-term survival. However, if our children do persevere, it will be because we recognize the gravity of our cataclysmic reality and change our education paradigm before it's too late. Public schools, with the coordination and expertise of school libraries and librarians, need to work together to disentangle the mainstream educational framework from institutionalized ignorance and political ideology to one based on a framework that accepts limits to growth, finite resources, and a more nature-based view of the world. Or they will be facing a global competitiveness of an entirely different sort from the kind the Department of Ed assumes. Getting the buy-in needed from all constituencies calls for an elegant subversion of climate science into a more ubiquitous, hands-on, connected curriculum that draws on all disciplines to develop skills that serve to help kids on a changing planet. So here's a plan. Achieving this objective requires that students be taught how to research, invent, and solve problems from kindergarten through their senior year. It's also necessary that students engage with specific problems in every core content area. This will allow students to learn how the changing environment is interconnected and impacts all aspects of life. Each content area in each grade level will have a specific project that must be completed during the school year that will focus on a specific issue concerning a place-based environmental issue. One of the core tenets of this project will be to reinforce the need to get students out of the classroom so they can be immersed in real-world issues that have direct impact on their lives. And the school library is key. The school library and the librarian are in a unique position to coordinate and facilitate this effort because of their cross-curricular knowledge, resource expertise, and focus on critical thinking skills. It will also be extremely helpful to have a place within a school that offers a communal environment where students from any grade or subject area can work to develop their ideas. Shifting the focus away from the classroom and the classroom teacher will also greatly diminish the ability for a single teacher to sabotage the project. It must also be said that each project, designed specifically for a core class and grade level, will have no mention of climate change. The emphasis of the unit will be problem-specific and will encourage students to solve unique problems with the facilitation of the school librarian and the classroom teacher. In a recent interview with NPR, climate scientist Catherine Hayhoe made it abundantly clear. The language we use to discuss climate change matters, and that facts will not change the mind of those dismissive of the science. Presenting people with viable solutions to the issues we face, however, is almost universally accepted. Therefore, teachers, librarians, and students should engage in work that will allow them to explore climate problems that have real-world solutions. In order for this plan to be implemented in a state like New York, a framework will have to be applied. First, significant resources will have to be allocated or allotted to develop place-specific, project-based learning modules. New York has experimented with Common Core learning modules in the past and has received mixed results. These modules, which can be found on engageny.org, can serve as a jumping-off point, which would allow curriculum experts to design units that are easily adaptable and flexible so that teachers and librarians can adjust the project to suit the needs of their district. Second, specialists with environmental backgrounds, not necessarily teachers, should be hired by every New York BOCES to work directly with districts within their specific network. These specialists will coordinate with school librarians so that they can provide their field expertise and knowledge of the curriculum with the districts. Third, librarians will utilize their knowledge of the entire initiative to coordinate the use of shared learning space within the library. This newly developed space will serve as an innovation lab so that students have the opportunity to read books, conduct experiments, design equipment, share ideas, interact with new technology, and build infrastructures. The school library, playing host to this innovation lab, will be transformed into a place that fosters new ideas, critical thinking, and hands-on experiential learning. Fourth, teachers will be obligated to shift their style of instruction to meet the needs of project-based learning assignments. They will serve as facilitators to in-depth investigations into real-world problems. And fifth, students will be encouraged to work with their peers to solve problems. With proper design and facilitation, they'll have the opportunity to work collaboratively with students currently working on similar problems in different classes. They will also inherently recognize how issues concerning the environment impact all areas of their education and, by extension, their lives. I wish we all had the opportunity to shadow a 10th grade student through her day right now. Imagine for a moment starting your school day at 7:30 a.m., where you are forced to sit in a cold desk for 45 minutes while the biology teacher lectures about the cell structure. Then a bell rings so that you can now be lectured about the use of railways in World War I, or the rhetorical strategies in an essay about elderly expats and Belize. Over and over for 9 periods, 7 hours, you do this. Is it any wonder that students seem to be apathetic and disinterested when their environmental science teacher decides to prattle on about climate change with the curriculum in this disjointed and unmoored from her everyday experience? This type of education is doomed to fail the student and the environment. This place-based learning initiative will have positive impacts for every student, teacher, and librarian. Without ever engaging in an argument about the impact of climate change, all students will spend significant time in their local environment to study and conduct experiments on the changing environment, or they will be in the library's innovation lab so that they can utilize their imagination to solve or design their way out of problems. Teachers will have the opportunity to benefit from a prepared project that allows for adaptation and encourages creativity and excitement. This short unit could be the introduction to a new teaching style for many veteran teachers who want to provide the best learning experience for students. School librarians can support teachers in their use of new instructional platforms, softwares, and resources, and the library will be recognized as the nucleus of the school. However, if the status quo is left unchanged, school libraries will continue their decline into becoming daycare centers, or worse, non-existent. Teachers will be reduced to lecturing disengaged students, and if we refuse to acknowledge that our students must be better equipped to handle the radically shifting climate, we know that these children will suffer greatly and will lack the critical skills needed to adapt to and mitigate the warming climate. Public schools have an obligation to prepare students to be successful in the future. We know without a doubt that the future will be dangerously erratic and will present problems that we currently cannot accurately predict. Therefore, teaching students real-world problem-solving skills is a moral imperative. The challenges we face as educators are vast, and the politics infused into our communities will continue to threaten our ability to provide the best possible education for our students. However, that does not mean we should not try to do everything in our power to give the next generation a chance to solve problems that could threaten their very lives. Libraries have long served as facilitators of resistance, change, and thriving culture, and I think the same should be said of the role libraries should play in public schools. The stark reality of furloughed librarians, shrinking collections, and slashed budgets is a sure sign that our education system is sick. The next generation will not be able to confront the reality of life in the Anthropocene without being informed and taught the skills necessary to be resilient and adaptive. If our children stand any chance of surviving, we must teach them the skills necessary to do so now. And as an educator, I recognize the untapped potential for teachers and librarians to form partnerships to steadily work to make these changes to correct the course of our kids' educational future trajectory. Thank you.
Hello, just gonna swap out. Take a moment. Okay, we're ready. I'm Ellie Irons. This is my collaborator, Anne Percoco. We're here with the next Epoch Seed Library. Thank you so much for having us. This is actually a first for us to be among other libraries. It's exciting. Did you want to introduce that?
Sure. This is one of the smallest versions of our library. As you'll see, it can get big, can get small. So I'm just gonna. Oh yeah. So this little box is one of the smallest permutations of our seed library. As you'll see, it can be very big or very small. And this is very small, and you can open it and see seed packets inside. So we'll just pass it around.
Right, and I'll jump right in. So the next Epoch Seed Library is an artist-run public access collection of novel, adaptable, and spontaneous seeds for the so-called Anthropocene age. So why are a couple of artists making a collection of seeds? Well, for one thing, they look nice. This is Asiatic dayflower, scanned under a scanning electron microscope, magnified to 530 times. This is evening primrose at 255 times. But more importantly than their aesthetic qualities, seeds, as you know, carry information, genetic instructions for the next generation. And as we've been acknowledging, climate change is happening rapidly in an ongoing call and response with human activities. And all forms of life need to adapt to these changes. And plants are doing so constantly. And actually, right here in the city, they're doing so at a faster rate than their rural counterparts. And as they adapt, they store all these changes in neat little collectible packages, seeds. So how did this start? As I mentioned, Anne and I are both artists, and we both have the habit of collecting and storing cast-off materials. So even before we started the seed library, more than 2 years ago at this point, Anne was already collecting large amounts of trash and cast-offs for sculptures, and I was already collecting colorful weedy plants from vacant lots to make paint. So we were both interested in wild urban plants as underappreciated kind of junk species of the city. We started collecting their seeds, both as a poetic gesture of appreciation for these plants that green our cities and as a practical activity with educational, archival, and we learned community building potential. So before we dig into the activities of the library, a bit about the lifestyle of our urban dwelling photosynthetic neighbors. Cities of the scale we see today haven't been around very long, and they're growing bigger every day. 66% of the world's population, as is often cited, is predicted to live in cities by 2050. And that's versus just 3% 200 years ago. So we're seeing rapid change. Here is an open corner lot in Northeast Brooklyn, in Bushwick, actually. It's experiencing cycles of growth and mowing and regrowth year after year. This ongoing cycle keeps this pocket of open earth in a state of perpetual renewal. It favors fast-growing, light-loving pioneer species, and also selects for plants that can adapt their growth form. So here we see pepperweed on the left growing outside of the mower's reach against a fence, and on the right, the dense growth of a plant that sits in the mower's path. So the places we gather seeds from are often described as empty or vacant, but we find that they are actually the most lively parts of the city. They're filled with all manner of non-human living things, most of them of the variety that turn sunlight into food, totally miraculous. They break up impervious surfaces, stabilize and build soil, mitigate the urban heat island effect by cooling our air, reduce stormwater runoff, capture airborne pollutants, and perhaps even aid human mental health through subliminal exposure to green space. These plants are tough and flexible. And it turns out their seeds are too. Lately, we've been learning that some seeds can remain viable for much longer than we thought, even sprouting after 32,000 years of dormancy recently. So as was mentioned earlier, of course, there are large institutions already deep into this seed saving for posterity project. Svalbard often gets referenced. Founded in 2008, it's deep underground on a remote island in Norway. Most seed banks like this focus exclusively on agricultural crops, which humans will certainly need. Another model is the local seed collecting kind of community level organization where people swap and share seeds that are open pollinated, meaning they can reproduce generation after generation, unlike hybrid or corporate owned GMO seeds, which need to be purchased year after year. These seeds are a common resource. So Nestle is a hybrid between these two models. We lend seeds, we accept seeds, and we're interested in saving them long term. But our collection is focused on the gaps between other models. So instead of going to agricultural fields or to engineering labs, we go to places like this. This is a view looking down on a portion of the Meadowlands in New Jersey. If you came from Newark Airport, you may have gone through there. A key collecting site for us. Plants that thrive here do so on their own without human maintenance. They're able to live with extreme changes that have hit this landscape as it's been transformed over the past 400 years, changing it from a salt marsh that Lenni Lenape foragers would have recognized into the post-industrial landscape it is today. So many plants considered native to a place like this can no longer survive, or at least not without intensive human restoration efforts. This here is a wild carrot plant, also known as Queen Anne's lace, sprouting out of rubble on an embankment in the Meadowlands. It was introduced to North America sometime in the last 400 years, but is considered native to Europe, Western Asia, and North Africa. Of course, these plants can certainly cause problems from humans, certainly in the spatiotemporal context of capitalism. Think kudzu and knotweed creating monocultures. But dismissing them as undesirable invaders is short-sighted. So Nestle encourages our audience to think beyond the limiting nature of native introduced, invasive or balanced, and to focus on the specific contexts for each individual plant. So here you might see waste, decay, messiness, but looked at a different way, we could also argue these weeds are breaking up an impervious surface, allowing stormwater runoff to sink into the ground through cracks, replenishing groundwater, and rather than overwhelming our already fragile combined sewer overflow system, which, as you know from the recent rain, is quite a problem here in New York City. More often than not, unfortunately, these plants are treated as a green, undifferentiated mass, all of them trash or worse. And particularly in rapidly developing areas like Bushwick, where I lived for 10 years or so, I would argue they're actually endangered because they're disappearing beneath high-rises and parking lots quite rapidly. So we're designed to attend to and appreciate these plants as individuals through the practice of seed saving. And in the context of libraries and archives, we've been thinking about each of these seeds a bit like a unique little mini library in and of itself, archiving the results of generations of evolution. As companion plants for the Anthropocene, Capitalocene, Chulocene age, whichever you pick, their DNA tells the story of their coevolution with humans, evolution that could be advantageous for making it through the bottleneck of the sixth mass extinction. And we're still learning how to handle our collection. Some of our knowledge comes from literature written by people, but a lot of what we're learning comes from the plants themselves. A bit more about that later. But for now, I'm going to hand off to Anne, who will walk us through some of our activities.
Okay. So as we're creating the library collection, first we find an interesting place that's been affected by human activity. This could be a highway median, an overgrown parking lot, a soccer field full of dandelions, underneath an elevated highway, or a vacant lot. These places are what we call junk space, which is a term coined by Rem Koolhaas. And this is a place that's overlooked, unused, untended, and thus hosts to numerous extraordinary possibilities. A place where artifacts accumulate, weeds grow, and history is most visible. We collect the seeds. Most plants produce seeds in the fall and early winter, but there are many that are hanging on at all times of year, including winter and during the summer and spring. There's seeds at all times of year. It's best not to collect them too early from the plant because they might not be finished developing, but usually you can tell if you touch the plant and seeds fall off, then they're definitely ready. We try to note the date of collection, the location, and the species. We may or may not separate the seeds from any chaff or husks and pack them into small envelopes with ID tags. We created a set of icons to describe the plant uses and possible dangers to humans and roles in their ecosystem. These icons could be applicable to different parts of the same plant. For example, you might have a plant where the root is edible, but the leaves are toxic. Or, it could be made to be medicinal after it's treated a certain way. The seed packets become part of our library collection, which is available to be added to or withdrawn from by anyone. This can be done in person at one of our exhibitions or via mail. In an art context, they can function as multiples within the book art tradition, but they're really, they are meant to be planted. The idea in a normal seed library is that you withdraw seeds from the library and plant them, and when the plant grows and matures, you collect seed back from the plant and deposit it back into the library. So sometimes that happens, especially lately, and we also just take them from the wild. Our exhibitions have ranged from very small to very large. For each new exhibition, we create a special collection of seeds from that geographical area. The seed library structure is also very adaptable. This is a show, a no longer empty show in the Bronx, where we custom built a small set of drawers into this steel I-beam in the raw exhibition space. This is a show at William Patterson University last year where we had the chance to take over an entire room. We had seed sorting and seed propagation areas with live plants, a sitting and reading area with a bulletin board for contributions and maps, and then large microscope photos of seeds, as well as the collection in the middle. Here's some other views where we also have site photos and a video. Since William Patterson last year, the next Epic Seed Library has been in quite a few places. This is an event with Chance Ecologies and the Queens Museum at Newtown Creek. We've been experimenting with modes of public interaction, guided seed walks, and more. We had our winter headquarters at Wave Hill, a garden in the Bronx. We did seed sorting and packaging. We held group events every weekend, made several batches of garlic mustard pesto. And we had big group meetings for Chance Ecologies. We'd like to experiment more with serving this function as a library, as a public meeting space for various constituencies with related missions. We also did at Wave Hill our first formal seed viability tests and had a pretty good success rate. Out of around 30 species tested, about 26 sprouted. Then we moved the library to Index Art Center in Newark. And we moved the plants from Wave Hill with us. They were really happy at Index. Morning glories flowered throughout. And all of them grew a lot. And you might recognize those are tomato plants, which we found growing wild in the Meadowlands. So technically, yeah, they're volunteers. We also participated in some events with interaction from visitors. Lots of folks took seeds and joined the mailing list. One thing we'd like to explore more is the potential with working with children in this project. We're working on beefing up our instructional materials to make it more possible for other groups to participate separately from us. And here are some slides and materials from a recent workshop that Ellie did with Big Green Theater, exploring seeds, plants, climate change with elementary school students. We're also doing a similar program for Wave Hill's Family Art Project next weekend. where visiting kids and their parents can learn about plant and take home the seeds of some plants that thrive in urban environments. And now looking to the future. So this is, these pictures are of a pot found in Wisconsin that had 800-year-old squash seeds in it, and they were sprouted and grew into this species of extinct squash. So we read about that and were inspired. It turns out that ceramic is a great material for storing seeds because it keeps them very, very dry. So this summer we're hoping to create some ceramic sculptures, like a limited edition, that would be long-term storage vessels for some of our seeds. They would function as sculptures in the art context, as time capsules, and containers for our seeds as archives. And they could also be used as planters.
How are we doing time-wise? Okay, cool. I think we can get through this. So in closing, I'd like to return to the seed we saw at the beginning, Asiatic dayflower. So these are its seeds under a regular light microscope. Each is about the size of a head of a pin. And this is what it looks like when the seed sprouts in New York City. I've returned to this particular patch along a fence in Bushwick to collect many times. Does pretty well here, but it originally evolved in Eastern Asia. Historically, it was cultivated in Japan as a pigment to color woodblock prints before they started importing synthetic pigments. I've experimented a bit with it myself. It actually works really well. It's close to light fast. It's also showed up in China at the site of copper mine spoils, where it's adapted to live in heavy metal-laden soil, and it's being studied as a hyperaccumulator and possibility for phytoremediation there. In some areas in the United States, it's considered a noxious weed. It's a next-level resistor because populations living in the Midwest have started to show resistance to Roundup, which is Monsanto's glyphosate-based herbicide. So this means Asiatic dayflower has reached the status of superweed, which is a technical term. But here in New York City, I've often seen it tolerated, even referred to as a wildflower. And the guidebook that Ann and I have been using, which was published in 2009, actually has the plant in it, describes its habitat, including the fact that it's intolerant of mowing. I've observed this too. I always find it along fences and other protective barriers where it's really hard to get the blades of a mower. But last time I went to this particular location to collect alongside that fence, I noticed something new. The lot behind it had recently been mowed, and there was this mat of Asiatic dayflower growing out in the center, less than an inch high, like if you got down and looked at it, flowering and going to seed. So it was doing its full cycle. So it's beginning to resist mowing tactics potentially. This is a co-created development. Human impacts in the form of mowing combined with the plant's flexibility, sculpting it into a new form. So what is this plant really? Of course, it's all of these things. It just depends on where you look. It's doing different things, engaging human activity differently in different places. But because it's a weed, its genome hasn't been sequenced. So we don't know how similar its genetic makeup is in these different locations. It's assumed that it's homogeneous, this homogeneous kind of McDonald's of weeds all over the world. Most sequencing thus far is limited to economically significant crop plants and model organisms. This is changing rapidly, of course, and we'd like our library to include data of this sort. It already does, of course, hidden in the seeds, just hasn't been read. So jumping off of this kind of resistant quality of weeds, this kind of discovery has led us to an interest in how plants and people can learn from one another. Clearly the weeds are learning how to resist us. So as a complement to the next Epoch Seed Library, we're convening a series of group discussions, multidisciplinary salons to facilitate the exploration of multi-species tactics for resistance, in which I would include contesting the age of man, which is one of the Anthropocene's more unfortunate taglines. On May Day, we acknowledged plant labor through some chalking in Crown Heights. And last Wednesday, we met in Sunset Park, where we looked at the relationship between knotweed, often described as an exotic invader, urban gardening, and gentrification. The mission of Weedy resistance and Next Epoch Seed Library are complementary and intertwined, and we're interested in how collecting seeds in public and sharing them freely and openly can be a form of resistance in and of itself. Get in touch if you want to join. Thank you.
don't believe so. Good afternoon. I'm Fred Stoss from the University of Buffalo. I'd like to first think about thanking all the organizers and the planners for this conference. It's a rather interesting opportunity to meet with so many like-minded people from such diverse backgrounds. So it's a kudos for those persons who put this together and as such. My background is that I have a previous life as a biologist and a zoologist and 8 years of research before I got a library science degree about 35 years ago that sort of stuck. And the rest is sort of like history. And I thought that what I would do today in terms of answering or trying to provide an answer to what are the roles that libraries may have in solving some of the questions that are asked here. And in terms of giving some examples, perhaps of what some libraries are doing, what librarians are saying, and sort of like giving an overview of what are some of the things that we could be expected to find in libraries that are providing training and learning opportunities in their libraries for addressing community-based preparedness exercises. I like to think that our libraries are, that we're like some of the weeds that were just described. We're everywhere, you know, and we're in urban settings, we're in suburban settings, we're in rural settings, and in some cases there are some libraries that are some in really bizarre places. But I think it's a time where we can look at what are the levels of expertise and the strengths the libraries and librarians in particular have in terms of dealing with a wide variety of types of examples of disasters that we may encounter along the way. And these are all examples from New York State. So we take a look at disasters big and small that have to be dealt with, and what are the roles that librarians have. I like to think, and if you take a look at the literature, there's not an awful lot that's written about what the role that libraries have before Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. Like to think that in 2006, when ALA is the first professional organization to go back to New Orleans after Katrina, one of the great things that we had an opportunity to do was go there and listen. I think that one of the great things that when you talk with the people who were in the restaurants, who were some of the local people where we were socializing in between sessions and workshops and those beautiful ALA business meetings, and cab drivers in particular, was just to listen to the stories they had to tell. So in 2006, we see sort of like the beginning of let's call it the beginning of a trend. And just recently, I think it was about a month and a half ago, one of the first reference books about developing a role of public libraries in emergency management comes out as a new book addressing this very issue of the role, the expanding role that libraries and librarians are playing. Well, I put together a couple things here, and if anybody wants these slides, you can get the full citations here. But what are librarians actually saying? They're saying advanced planning is critical to the survival of recovery from a disaster. It's an article that defines the online resources that delve on emergency preparedness in the U.S. It's a nice web-based article. Disaster preparedness and the involvement of Red Cross volunteers along the way. Again, taking a look at public libraries successfully provide a range of disaster preparedness and recovery services that were not provided and could not have been provided by other government agencies. That the libraries are filling some rather critical gaps in the information exchange, and we will define information rather broadly in this case. And I think that we take a look at even right now that we're starting to see the actual results of research that is being done of those very roles. There's some found, just to summarize here, some found comfort in much needed information in public libraries. The reasons for their visits included internet access, information and technology assistant, mental escape, and refuge. Participants also discussed how the destruction of libraries added to their sense of loss and how the restoration of libraries gave them a sense of hope. But most important, I think, is the one that's in red. The survey respondents here found that nearly 1/2 of the survey respondents and 40% of the interviewees used public libraries during disasters. So I think it's a great compliment to the recognition that libraries mean something. And these statements, or these, if you want to call librarian testimonies, give us a chance to sort of like they set the case for the role that libraries can and I would say must play. In any local public institution, without a pre-assigned disaster role represents a lost opportunity, and this includes libraries and librarians. Especially this is taking a look at what the role that our public libraries should be doing. The publication of the Public Library Association is actually coming out where you'll find perhaps a larger number of these roles, and quite understandably so that it would come from this particular journal, connecting public libraries with community response activities and initiatives. And if we're looking for helpers, Jessamine West, who there are several of us in the room who know Jessamine rather well through the Social Responsibilities Roundtable, just recently published a paper where Development of Disaster Planning and Community Resilience Guidebook by the New Jersey State Library. And I think if you take a look at the proximity of Jessamine's call here of saying what happened with Hurricane Sandy, which was a very low-grade hurricane, if you recall, for those of you who bore the brunt of that, that we're still seeing today the increase of the awareness that our libraries have in terms of dealing with this. Well, what are some of the roles that libraries have in terms of providing a setting for such kinds of instruction, workshops, and the such? That they represent a safe haven. And I'm not going to read the slides. You can do that yourselves. I can tell sort of like the story here, but there are people who are looking for normal restoration of services, that they want their lives to get back to normal as quickly and as completely as possible. So what happens, though, when we saw with Katrina and Rita and Sandy and Irene and Lee, when your library actually becomes a FEMA recovery center because your library happens to be one of the very few large buildings that was intact, that had all of the internet connections and the such. So you become, and your staff become part of the team that's going to assist in the actual recovery, not the preparedness. And we take a look at terms of what the information hub that our libraries represent, where I like to put down, let's call these the 3 Ps of preparedness. Preparedness means you're going to do this before the disaster happens, not during or after, because you're no longer prepared once it's done. Preparedness means planning ahead. And preparedness, I think, in the case of when you look at the roles that we can play, is actually looking at library outreach and an extension of the very services that we provide every day for different kinds of settings. It doesn't necessarily have to be related to emergency planning or preparedness for a community level, but it's an opportunity for libraries to reach out to the communities that they serve in rather special kinds of ways. The delivery of this information, the fact is that your library just might be the only IT center that's going to be available for miles around. And evacuee resources. Where do people who have had to evacuate their homes, they've had to leave their homes, they may have lived there for anywhere from a few months to several decades, and all of a sudden they find that their home and the second floor of their house is inundated with water, or worse, it's completely underwater. But where are they going to go to find the resources and the disaster recovery centers and the plans for being able to put that into motion, that recovery process? And how do you improvise? most of the libraries who have to deal with these kind of issues aren't expecting that these things are going to be routine. But perhaps from what we've heard during the course of this morning, especially in light of some of the evidence that we see from climate change, our libraries may be in a situation where we're going to see an exceedingly larger number of these types of events that are going to require communities to have a preparedness planning component addressed sooner rather than later. So if this is going to be true, I guess you would say, well, we better get going. So we take a look at where have some of these things taken place. The Richmond Public Library served as a strong community anchor, and it provided FEMA assistance. So we see in Virginia, when there's a flood going on, the library becomes a center for power. In that last line there, it says a center for power and internet access. I like to think that it's not just not electrical power where you can go and plug in your things and recharge your phone. I'm thinking that the fact is this is where you're going to find the information that's going to save your backside when you need to have a new home built, or you need to find out where you're going to get all the resources to replace everything that was lost in the disaster. So what are some of the things that you can expect to learn in a library if you're going to be providing a facility for training and expertise and education? Well, disasters are relatively unexpected. We may hear about them days, maybe forecast a week to a week and a half away that there's a hurricane coming or a particular storm system coming, that they're relatively unexpected. Emergency personnel are definitely going to be overwhelmed. Lives are going to be endangered, and expectations for help. And this is where the libraries come in, because we're so trusted, we're time tested. People are expecting libraries to have answers to questions, and the expectations for help are going to be high when people come to your library. So you have to thinking about in terms of how are first responders that are coming into your library to talk about developing a community-based preparedness plan going to be talking about sheltering in place, sheltering for extended stays, or mass care community shelter. And the picture that I have here was actually, this picture is taken at SUNY Binghamton. It's maybe about a mile and a half from where I went to high school. I graduated from Vestal High School. When the Susquehanna River overflows its banks by 38 to 42 feet, depending on whose numbers you want to listen to, the gym of SUNY Binghamton became an evacuee center, and they had 1,500 people that were not necessarily all at Binghamton. A lot of people said that they were, but they were scattered. Most of them were at the State University of New York at Binghamton. So we see that we need to have protective actions to take. The people are expecting to have certain types of elements of their environment restored. And what they're going to be looking at are for the immediate creature comforts that we have. I want a place that's going to be clean. I want a place that's going to be safe. I want a place that is going to be friendly. And this is the type of things that you're going to find when you bring in persons who are trained experts in their field of emergency preparedness to tell your library users this is what you can expect to see in advance of disasters taking place. So you want to know, what the hazards are. How do you become prepared for the different types of hazards that you have, and especially this is the last one about knowing who your critical components and contacts are going to be. Whether they're at the federal level with FEMA or your state, county, and local first responders. These are the people who might staff the ambulance squad that's just down the road, who are going to be the people who are going to be transporting folks to hospitals or to evacuee centers. So when we see of Lancaster County, the library system announces an emergency preparedness training summit for public libraries. What they did was in 2015, they brought in a whole bunch of people to actually sit down with a whole group of community leaders in saying that if you want to do a disaster preparedness program, these are the things that you have to do. These are the agency and the agency personnel who are going to help you accomplish the goals of setting up a community-based center. So what you do is you meet families and you do things about answering basic questions that people who are subject to disasters are going to be asking you. Like, how do I get out of here? Where do I go? How do I go? Do I need to have practice drills? And these are the kinds of things that your instructors are going to be teaching in these programs. You have to treat this as a situation that's going to be a training activity for eventually reaching out to the public, either directly by inviting people from your neighborhood to your branch library and having them saying, have you set up a home personal preparedness plan for what you do, or bringing it in and bringing in your community leaders and saying, what are we doing from a neighborhood? What are we doing from a section of a city or a town or a village, or even small hamlets? I was just driving through portions of New York State, and I was thinking about Windham, New York, that during one of our more recent hurricanes, the entire town, all the roads going into Windham were washed out. And they had to have special bridges that had to be made just to get food and water and people in and out of the village of Windham. A very small rural community in the, sort of like I would say, it's the ski belt of the northeastern Catskills. So what do you do when an entire village is completely isolated because of a disaster? And then there are non-disaster things that your libraries can participate in terms of participating in a wide variety of settings, eco fairs, energy fairs, and setting up kiosks that say, my library is doing this. And I like to think that your library kiosks are one of the situations where we have virtual as well as real kiosks out there in terms of, here's a listing of print resources that you can have, because there are still people who like to put tangible things in their hands, and as well as being able to look up things electronically. The Claverack Library, I dare say it's just up the river from here, up on the Hudson River, put together an emergency preparedness program that had the Red Cross coming in, talking about what can be expected from a health and safety perspective that the Red Cross can do, in terms of how do you use various types of medical processes or processes and procedures and instruments for being able to help. CPR skills that you might have to know. What do you do if a person who's in an evacuee center, all of a sudden they're so stressed out they have a heart attack, or you think they're having a heart attack? But what are the special concerns that we have for people who are going to be facing, because remember, you're doing this before the disaster happens. So what do we do in terms of preparing your residents of the communities that you serve with the knowledge and the expertise to be able to handle those personal emergencies at a greater level? Their action should be taken before, during, and after, in terms of planning ahead for what's going on and sharing that hazard-specific information with your family members, and including pertinent materials for a family disaster plan, which also includes being able to, what's the easiest way to get out of my house if my house is on fire? I remember my daughter and my wife and I used to every once in a while practice these drills of saying that there's a fire in the kitchen, where are you going to get to go out of the house? And you go out the front door, and if the fire's in the living room, you go out the back or the side door, depending on how close which door is to the to where the fire is. So we used to do these things, and we used to try to make it a game. Our daughter, when she was smaller, thought that it was clever. Maybe she thought it was just another thing of her father being funny or attempting to be funny. So we say that we always have to practice, be ready at hand, have your emergency supplies at hand. One of the great things during our hurricanes, especially in the southeast where we get a lot more hurricanes or tornadoes, places like Home Depot and Lowe's and some of your big box stores will actually provide emergency preparedness kits. It will have up to 3 days worth of dried food, medical supplies. You should have something like a backpack full of maybe a couple days worth of clothing changes. All the medicines or backup medications that you need. But how do you go about preparing yourself for an extended stay if it is required for you to have one? If a disaster is happening, what are you going to be doing? You have to have yourself a supply of clean water. So we want to be able to go through and tell people, where can you get and carry with you a supply of clean water, bottled water in a closet, bottled water in your basement, or someplace where you can get a hold of a case of water or whatever you need to sustain your family for a couple of days. Because this is going to be the first step of getting yourself back to recovery at the individual and the community level, is being prepared with the resources that you have. So the mitigation and prevention, your overall goals are rather simple. You've essentially got 5 tasks that you have to do. And you can say that every one of those are things that you can do at your library, to take that old branding exercise to I guess you would say, a 2017 perspective. You take a look at emergencies in your home and saying, what can we do to plan for those, as well as planning for emergencies in your car. Everybody's got probably a spare tire. I remember once hearing Al Gore saying that despair is not necessarily something that's the tire it's in the back of your car. It's sometimes the way we feel about our environmental conditions. I think we heard a little bit of that earlier in the day. Emergencies where you play in terms of what happens from a recreational perspective for when you're on vacation. We don't have very many tornadoes in New York, but they require immediate action if you're going to hear those warnings, because we don't have the sirens here in New York like they have in Denver. We do have wildfires in New York. We do have hurricanes, and boy, we've had some that have been doozies that not have been necessarily the extent or the enormity of Katrina, but we have had places, and there is Wyndham, when that was one of the bridges that was knocked out during that particular flood. And all of a sudden, after Sandy, we see all sorts of things that the New York City government starts coming up with brochures. We have community preparedness programs that are down there for looking at the critical roles that are necessary. And when we take a look at those government agencies that are providing services, they are the ones who are going to be assigning various types of responsibility along the way. So we have community leaders who should be taking a more active role. And here we have one in Long Island where a county legislator hosts a preparedness training at the North Shore Public Library. So here we actually have that collaboration taking place. And we're doing this for the benefit of the public at large. Now, when you get the copies of my slides, I've got some things in here in terms of where can you find those FEMA resources, multi-hazard planning things. State, local, tribal governments have their own emergency preparedness programs, and you can go find them for your individual states by just going to your state agency that deals with it, and you will find community preparedness programs that have been outlined, such as knowing your state's infrastructure for emergency preparedness. Here it is for New York. And being able to know, most states have Citizen Preparedness Corps. These are people who go out and do this type of workshop and instruction. Invite them into your library. Find out who they are and saying, I want you to come in and do maybe one lecture or do a whole series of programs for you. The rationale is to get them to teach the public and the neighborhoods that you serve. Here's the councils in New York, local councils in New York State, additional partners for your programs. There are all sorts of places where the instructors and the educators are there. If your community is not listed, contact your state citizen corps. They will either set one up or tell you where you can. Now, just to remember, coming up in a couple of months, September, Emergency Preparedness Month. So when you leave here today, it's sort of like think about this on your way home. Is what are you going to do this September for emergency preparedness? Because you want to maximize awareness and encourage participation in disaster preparedness to affect change at the community level. Thank you.
Okay, we have about 7 minutes for questions for this panel.
All right, we'll just let you guys go. All right, now I'm going to ask my question. Hi, I'm Kate. I'm Kate Hutchins at the University of Michigan, and I wrote down this question, so I'm going to read it out loud because I think it applies a little bit to all of the talks. And it's a little bit, I apologize, it's a little bit of a devil's advocate or kind of contentious question. And it's a big conceptual question, too.
You're really winding this up.
Yeah. I didn't get to speak, so I need some microphone time. No, when we talk about how our institutions or organizations or subversive K-12 programs respond to these situations, or especially when we say how we are uniquely positioned to respond to what we think about, how we are uniquely positioned to respond, what do we think about the lurking notion that somehow libraries or archives are somehow rhetorically winning in the case of these climate disasters and problems and when they come to fruition? And how can we handle accusations of self-interest as they come up, especially when it comes to like things about funding, as like when you start raising the alarm and then you're like, see, we were right, or not raising the alarm even, but just responding and being accused of like somehow triumphing in that scenario or something like that.
Foolishly benefiting from being in the disaster business. I don't have an answer. I just wanted to say ghoulishly benefiting from the disaster business.
That's it.
Yeah, I think that I showed the one research paper that was up there. They're saying when these disasters happen, and we take a look at what happened just a few weeks ago out in the Midwest, those massive floods that they had beginning, I guess, in northeastern Texas, up into Oklahoma, Nebraska, and into Missouri, where they were saying these floods were part of a changing climate scenario. They didn't say that climate change caused it. They said the conditions are being changed, that we see these events taking place more so. Where's going to be the first place that a lot of those people are going to go for help? They're going to go to the libraries for help. So we see that in some cases up to 50% of the people who are impacted are going to look at their public libraries in particular for saying, I need help in dealing and coping with the disaster that just came. If you say that disaster perhaps may have been caused by changing climatic conditions, maybe you want to find saying in a more vernacular kind of a way, so at a 10th grade level of saying, maybe Senator Inhofe ought to go to Washington during that period of time and take a beach bucket full of water and pour it on the Senate floor and say, did this happen because of climate change or not? So, but when we see people responding, they're going to come to libraries because why? They trust libraries. They trust librarians. And they're going to be looking for answers that they go to look for answers for a cookbook. They go to look for answers for what kind of a field guide do we want. They're going to be coming to saying, where can I find a respite for recovery once this disaster happens?
I guess I will take a little bit of a stab at it. What I would say is try not to brand yourself as being in the disaster business. Try saying like, this is an extension of the services we already are supplying. So when you talk about power, we already have a strong rhetoric of being community advocates. And so this is just one more way we're advocating for our communities, and we have a strong reputation of advocating for particularly the powerless in our communities. And so anytime we can stand up for folks who wouldn't otherwise be stood up for, this is just part of our legacy. So I would just try to say, we don't have to invent a new rhetoric. We need to stick with our existing rhetoric, but just keep doing it better, and keep being aware of all the things that we can provide that we aren't providing. And so I think that's how I would try to circumvent it.
Okay, 2 more questions. One here and one.
I just want to say a comment. I was thinking about collapse. We're talking about collapse, but like on a larger scale. And I was thinking there are people who, for them, the collapse has already happened. When you think of homeless people, where do they go? To the library. It's resources, information, archives, but sometimes it's just air conditioning or heating. I hate to reduce our skills to that, but that's the sort of the harsh reality of that.
Thanks. Hi, this is for Ellie and Ann. That was amazing. Thank you so much. As a longtime New York City dweller, I'm a big fan of wildlife in the city. There's a lot of it. So I'm just wondering, and I want to get some seeds from you.
Please.
I was just collecting dandelion seeds the other day. Have you thought about other forms of wildlife in the city, meaning the animal wildlife? Like, I'm sure you've noticed that there's a lot of animal wildlife, but I mean, or is your...
No, I mean, I think we're definitely, both Ann and I are interested in the kind of multi-species aspect of seeds, and that often plants are in symbiotic relationships with other organisms, and certainly to have a flourishing, extremely diverse plant landscape, you need a variety of kinds of other species interacting with it, from birds to
pollinators,
squirrels to pollinators to even people can be facilitators as well. I mean, we think of ourselves as facilitators of moving seeds around as well, in a kind of depauperate landscape that doesn't have as many animals. So, do you want to add anything to that, Ann?
Fred?
No, I was going to say, add to that question, and I just wanted to say one other thing. No, go ahead.
Oh, you did a good job, Ellie.
Thanks, Ann.
Thank you. Back in 1995, we put together a program at the American Library Association on the essentially the part of the U.S. Global Change Research Program on their Global Change Data and Information System. And we were into day 2. When that program took place was day 2 of a massive heat wave that would eventually kill up to 1,500 people in Chicago. Chicago now has essentially a policy that says if the temperature gets above a certain level, that the stores down by, let's call it Michigan Avenue, stay open and people can go in to find that place. Because what happened was the people who died, old, health compromised people who were living on the upper levels of floors, and they couldn't, there was no electricity for fans, air conditioning. They, in some cases, didn't have the strength to open the windows to their tenement apartments. And they were found days later dead, essentially of heat exhaustion. So they were saying, if we're going to get these warnings that there's going to be a severe heat wave, go downtown and sit in the air conditioning of some of the stores at some places that some of them actually stay open 24/7.
Thank you all.